So good afternoon, dear students, and we are again back to our discussion on Simone de Beauvoir. And today's talk is especially uh, thought on particularly the second sex. So it is primarily an introduction to the second sex. The second sex, the magnum opus of Simone de Beauvoir that we all know. And this one actually was published in France, 1949, in a very crucial time when Simone de Beauvoir was actually planning for a text like this. And it was almost a gap of 5 years, after the publication of the second sex, that the French women ultimately got the vote of, right of voting and their right for suffrage. So that kind of capacity they gained ultimately. Now, it may a kind of a very major question to all of us. What really happened for which women in France, they got their voting rights so late? What provoked such kind of a situation? Now, so many factors really worked that propelled a condition like this to get the voting right for the women in France, after such a long period. First of all, some political and the social conditions I think I need to speak all about right now, which played a very vital role. Number one is to the increase of birth rate. Somehow, the necessity of increasing birth rate and to tackle conditions like major depopulation. So those were the situations primarily that was necessary at a time, at that very moment, that created conditions like this. And the voting right for the women were in that sense not given much importance to. Rather, women as a machinery, women as a system to produce more children, they must play the role of wives, mother, and that was something was more highlighted. So that was the very primary reasons, increase of birth and tackling situations like major depopulation. Number one. If we think of the technical issues, contraception, use of contraception was, either illegal, was not in practice, that was banned in one way. And the right of abortion to the women, it was not yet given to them. It was actually was not in practice at that very time. So it was such a social system in France at that very time that not allowing contraception and the right to abortion, and it was somehow was approved of by all the political system of the society, and society in general was actually trying to pressure on the women to be a very perfect mother, to be as a perfect woman. This is how they wanted to look at woman at that very time. So this is something that denied the women to have their own voting rights at that very time. Now, few other significant issues that we need to discuss before we move to the text, the introductory discussions that we are planning to have today. The first of the important issue that of course, that French women that they had to face at that very time, somehow it is very bizarre to think at a time when in 2021 where we are discussing Simone de Beauvoir and the condition of the French women. But it may seem to us very bizarre at this very stage, but you will be surprised knowing that women in general, they were considered as legal quote-unquote minors. They were considered legal minors even if it was 1938. So it was till 1938, women were basically considered as a legal minor. If it is one part, and the other part is they had to fight along because it took a long time to get that right to contraception. And it was in 1967 when they for the first time got the right of contraception. And the right to abortion that the French women got in 1974. So look the very bizarre conditions. Look how society actually somehow blocked the way of thinking. Some society somehow blocked the way of living for women, even if that we generally think of a kind of a very a progressive society in that sense. It was in 1965 that the women of France had to wait to open a bank account without having a kind of a assurance, a kind of a signature of their husband. So a woman would like to open her own bank account for which she had to wait up to 1965. So these were some major groundbreaking conditions that the women of the time in France, they had to face. This is number one that I think is important one. Number two that I would like to move on regarding this very policy of voting for the women. It's very political dimension that has to be mentioned at this very moment. And it is primarily the left-wing politicians, okay? The left-wing politicians in France, somehow they were for the suffrage right of the women in France. Somehow it seemed that they are supporting for the causes of the suffrage rights of the women in France. But you know, there were some counter arguments as well. Even if there was a kind of a support from the left-wing politicians, but there were also a different counter argument at the same time invoked in the society that if the women were given the voting right, probably they would simply follow the kind of directions, instructions of the conservative Catholic Church, and that if they follow the instructions of the conservative Catholic Church, that will be very difficult for the left-wing politicians. So in spite of having a wholehearted support for the women of the time, they couldn't do it primarily. So it gradually making the whole event delayed. And at the same time, we know it very well that the influence of the Catholic Church was so strong on the women in the society in general that it actually put the whole event of allowing voting right to the women, disturbed. So that are the significant factors of the society at that very time that changed the scenario, that were making the whole process of two parts of the society, male and the female, they join together and to make a society successful. So in other hand, in case of the women, it really made that journey disturb continuously. At the very same time, an international event also took part somehow regarding this very failure initially for the voting right of the women in France. And what was that? It was the German, and their occupation of France during the Second World War. And we all know that Second World War between 1939 to 1945, at that very moment, the French government, in collaboration with the Nazi regime, they decided to do something serious. And the women who were married, who had children, suddenly they decided to dismiss all the married working women from their jobs. They were denied of their rights. They were actually, avoid of to have a good sustenance and a living. So such kind of a drastic and the serious condition of the women, since they were married, so They were actually, shacked from their jobs. So at this very stage, there was no choice for the women. So they were cornered, they were marginalized, they were socially, and in a very degradation. They had a degradation in the society in general. So at that very background, we find Simone de Beauvoir is coming up with her magnum opus, The Second Sex, a kind of a project that she initiated in 1946. I was talking about that the background in which Simone de Beauvoir actually attempted to do that. It was the time that society trying to make goody-goody wives and mothers. Women were basically asked for. They were actually, requested for, so that there will be a kind of a good wife and good mother. And little control can be found on the part of the women on their own body. Women had no right on their own body, on their own fertility rights, on their own choices, and of course, they had very less capacity to control on their own sexuality. Women had no financial autonomy. Keeping all these issues together in mind, Simone de Beauvoir fought intellectually to do something for the cause of the women in the society, and she started writing that magnum opus, The Second Sex. Now, Second Sex as a text is highly debatable, okay? For after the publication of the text, around 50 years, it was that matter of discussion of the hot talks. It's a topic of debates, the kind of issues that Simone de Beauvoir raised in The Second Sex. It created uproar. Now, we have some very brilliant comments. In one way, some of the critics are there to assert that Second Sex is the most criticized and one of the less read works in feminism. If this is one kind of a comment that we find after the publications of Simone de Beauvoir's The Second Sex, on the other hand, in 1999, we have the Toril Moy, another thinker and feminist, who had that famous statement supporting the importance of Simone de Beauvoir's Second Sex. What was Toril Moy's comment? She was there to say the Second Sex should be considered as a major philosophical text and the deepest and most original work of feminist thought to have been produced in the century. So it is a philosophical text and having some deepest insight that we can find. That someone is thinking a lot, going deeper, and to pick up some of the very crucial issues. Exact why society likes so? What are the causes that society behave in such a manner? So this is something she would like to dissect, very minutely, to identify and to pinpoint the causes of the downfall of women in the society in general. So Toril Moy's opinion is more positive that we find over there. And Simone de Beauvoir actually is trying to highlight them in the glossary, in the key ideas of Simone de Beauvoir, because situation is that very contextual position that we have discussed already, that connects the position of a woman to the society in general. So it was that kind of a text. Simone de Beauvoir's Second Sex is a kind of a text that situates a woman in what particular social, political, anthropological, and financial position that we would like to see women in general. So through different conditions, Simone de Beauvoir has attempted to connect and to discuss in this text. Essentially, it tries to foreground the position of woman and the phenomenological situation is attempted to highlight in what particular existential crisis that women are suffering from. And not only that, a feminist reading of Simone de Beauvoir's Second Sex is a brilliant layer that we can read it out. Simone de Beauvoir was very much influenced by Karl Marx and the Marxian ideology. So this text is, of course, one of the finest reading of Marxian ideology and the reading of history. That social, the victims of social disharmony. So this text talks a lot about this. This text is something that is one of the pioneering texts of the feminine manifesto. And it also, she would like to talk about women. And the psychology that operates in the society, what are very particularly discussed in this text, the Second Sex. Now, Second Sex is voluminous, huge in size, and the reading of the text can give the essence to the mind of the reader that how much labor, how much homeworks and the tasks are done by the thinker, by the writer. Now, this huge volume of the text can be summarized. It can be the kind of gist that we can have from the text. It can be divided in two parts. Okay. The totality of the ideology of Simone de Beauvoir's The Second Sex. Number one, women is the absolute big O others. Now, why is women as the absolute other? Simone de Beauvoir gradually pinpoints one after another. And the construction of the femininity. What do we call by feminine? How is femininity constructed? What are the ingredients of femininity? These are some of the basic things that Simone de Beauvoir has highlighted. And she has added ample references. Numerous texts and their references can be found in each and every chapter. Now, physically, the text Simone de Beauvoir's The Second Sex is divided into two parts, two volumes actually. The first volume is entitled Facts and Myths. And the second volume is entitled Woman's Life Today. It has some other versions, maybe because it is a translated version. It is a translated text. Naturally, the kind of terms we are using, like woman's life today, it may have some different terminology once the text is translated in some other way. So some light variations can be found in else also. Facts and Myths primarily discusses the kind of popular myths connected to women in the society, women in general. Because human being, as they are considered as the male and the female, since time immemorial, since the beginning of the civilization. So, how does civilization look at the history of woman? What happened to that early women? How did they do? What are the facts and the myths connected to the position of women, the women's situation? Is there any gradual development? Is there any certain changes that we are trying to discuss or not? This is all discussed in this first volume of the text, Facts and Myths. Second volume, Women's Life Today, discusses more on the position of women in general. So, what is the position of women today? What are the women of our time they behave? What are the conditions that they are facing today? How are they accepted and rejected as well? The contextually present status of women is discussed elaborately in the second volume of The Second Sex. Now, the idea of femininity that we are talking about. If we go for some early discussions of the second sex, so the conception of femininity and the conception of women in general. So now the point that comes up is that society and its patriarchal nature, and in this patriarchal nature, society has always attempted to construct the idea, the concept of femininity. Now, what is the main argument in the text? Simone de Beauvoir actually argues in The Second Sex, down the history, down the lanes of history, that woman as a human being has been constructed by men as quote-unquote others, woman as others, woman as someone else. And they have always attempted to deny access to autonomy to them. In most cases, it may seem to us the present situation is quite opposite. It may seem to us the present scenario is totally different, as Simone de Beauvoir in 49. But if we think of the general discussion, if we think of the condition improper, then we can easily identify that women as a human being, as their femininity is constructed by the patriarchal society, they are primarily was given no access to, that autonomy, autonomous living. And society has always imposed their decisions on women. It is very common. It has been in the society. The kind of upliftment, the kind of liberty, the kind of freedom that we see on the part of the women today, the number is negligible, my dear. Now, the position of men is so unique, Somehow we find that this men, or that patriarchal part of the society, they have always attempted to marginalize the position of the woman. And women are basically thought of, they will support the causes of the male, as it is generally expected to. They will basically do something for the cause of the males, and they are built together for the support of the interests of the males only. So they are merely supporter. They are never on the foreground. They are never on the platform, on the forefront. They are supporting in every possible way. Now here comes the argument of Simone de Beauvoir. Now, Beauvoir is trying to assert here that the position that man actually takes up in the society, as society generally tries to project in front of us. The position of woman is actually quote unquote universal subject. And the position of woman on the other is quote unquote the big O. They are the other. Now the man are the universal subject, and the position of the woman, they are the big O others. Look, this is how societies basically attempt to look at the woman. And this continuous journey, this continuous attempt, this continuous position that women carry only because of the patriarchal ideology, which is so strong. And somehow, the males in our society, according to Simone de Beauvoir, the males in our society, as Simone de Beauvoir thinks, that they are enabled with a kind of a thought inbuilt since when they are growing up, that they are superior, and the woman counterpart, the female counterpart, they are inferior by nature. So this is how this society has continuously prepares a network. In such a network, women are internalized, they are oppressed, and they are marginalized. And they are never in the center. Now, Beauvoir is very clear-cut in her statement in the second sex. She is there to say that, no, I am not of the opinion that the males are the representatives of that patriarchal society. What does she mean actually? Simone de Beauvoir would like to focus that both the men and the women, they should play the role of patriarchy. Women are in no way less significant to exercise the role of patriarchy. They can be patriarchal even when a woman is, by nature or gender, female in identity. So look, a kind of a balance that Simone de Beauvoir would like to have in the society. Now, sexual oppression is a kind of an event that we see, that we experience, and that is very much present in the society. And Beauvoir is in no way less informed about the sexual oppression that a woman experiences in her daily life. Now, Beauvoir is going to say that, the gender role that society constructs, it is constructed quite early in the stage. And it has such an effect in the society, it has an perpetual presence. A boy, when he grows up with a kind of a sense that he can oppress, he can suppress the women folk. Now, this is the text, the famous second sex, in which Simone de Beauvoir declared, I quote Beauvoir, the famous phrase, one is not born, but rather becomes a woman. So, Beauvoir actually makes a significant opinion here, citing that the kind of female nature that we impose on a woman, it is never pre-established. It is never pre-established, which means it is something that we impose on. It is never with that capacity that a girl is born with. So, Beauvoir here trying to apply her existential question and that existential opinion that she believed so long, that existence precedes essence. In that fact, that society traditionally attempts to make a sexual segregation in our culture, in our society. And, it is the biological factors, it is the reproductive roles that women in our society perform in general, for which the patriarchal society is in a kind of a habit to give more importance to the reproductive capacity of the women, and they are in no way giving importance to the intellectual capacity of the woman. So they are somehow by default have managed to think in that particular way. So they are never ever giving a kind of a, condition. I would like to refer at this very stage the Pirates of the Caribbean. Now, in the Pirates of the Caribbean, there is introduced a particular woman. The woman is knowledgeable, woman who is a lover of science. Now, when in course of a particular context, situation, she gets into the room of a scientist who was probably, working some mathematical calculations on the board, and with a telescope, looking at the sky, and then the women get in his room. And outside there was a placard: women and dogs are not allowed. The name of the movie is The Pirates of the Caribbean. Number one. Number two, when that girl, that young woman, who immediately could identify the kind of mistake that the scientist who was actually in before she entered the room, that you have done certain mistake, and the position of the telescope, the way you have set it, is not the correct one. You have to set it in a very different way. Then the scientist couldn't even put faith on the statement made by the woman. Rather, immediately the scientist declared the woman is quote-unquote witch. Now, categorizing the capacity of a woman as witch, the same thing I do remember in the context of William Shakespeare's The Tempest. Now, we find two magicians. One is Prospero, another one is Sycorax. But Prospero's magic is the magic that is heightened, that is praised. But somehow Sycorax is no other. Her magic is in no way praised. Rather, she is categorized as a witch. So find how society basically categorize women folk in our society, and the tradition is so long. Now, there is often a kind of a misinterpretation of the second sex, that Simone de Beauvoir doesn't even consider the biological difference between women and men. No, the matter is not like that at all. Simone de Beauvoir very much considers, very much supports the biological differences between the women and the men. But it doesn't mean Simone de Beauvoir supports, for the cause of the biological differences, the male, the man will actually suppress the woman only because you are biologically stronger, you are physically stronger than the women. That should not be there. Think of the Bible. Don't you think the Holy Bible is a patriarchal text? The way we have Adam, the way we have Eve, and the way Adam is superior than Eve, and Eve has to maintain everything. Whatever Adam is there to instruct her. So there is actually the very same kind of condition that God is very patriarchal. God is also instructing Eve that you have to follow each and every word that Adam is instructing you. So God's patriarchal nature and supporting that same kind of notion that we find in the case of Adam, and at the time of banishment, think of. At the time of banishment, do you remember? Adam was given the punishment that now on you have to earn your bread at the cost of your sweat. So this is how the patriarchal system arose, and that subordinated the position of the women. So in brief, that was all about the very brief introduction to the second sex. So that was from my side, and thank you so much for your listening.